In the tranquil city of Zephyr, life was about to change forever. The people of this advanced civilization had long enjoyed an era of peace and prosperity, their towering silver spires gleaming under a gentle sun. But on a seemingly ordinary day, a strange shape appeared in the sky above the capital, growing larger by the second. "Unidentified craft, you are entering restricted airspace," came the calm but firm voice of Lena, the city's air traffic controller. "Please identify yourself and state your intentions." There was a crackling of static, then a voice unlike any Lena had heard before. "People of Zephyr, we come in peace," it said, the words translated into her language by some unseen technology. "We are the Nebula, and we seek your help." The plea. As the alien ship settled onto the landing pad outside the Zephyr Grand Assembly Hall, a crowd gathered to witness the historic moment. The ship was sleek and angular, its hull patterned with swirling blue lines that seemed to shift and dance before the eye. A hatch opened, and 3 figures emerged. They were tall and slender, with luminous skin that shimmered like opals. The one in the center stepped forward, raising a long-fingered hand in greeting. "I am Ambassador Zarn of the Nebula," the alien said, its voice resonating from a small device on its chest. "We have come to warn you of a great danger, and to ask for your alliance." Inside the assembly hall, the Zephyr leaders listened with growing concern as Zarn laid out the situation. The Nebula, it seemed, were locked in a desperate war with another spacefaring race, the Vorians. The Vorians were bent on conquest, their advanced weapons leaving a trail of destruction across the galaxy. "We believe they will come for your world next," Zarn said gravely. "Your resources, your technology, they will stop at nothing to claim it all." The assembled Zephyrs murmured amongst themselves, some with fear, others with skepticism. How could they trust these strange beings? And even if the threat was real, how could Zephyr hope to stand against an enemy that had crossed the stars? The decision. High Counselor Jaren called for order, his aged face lined with worry. "Ambassador Zarn," he said, "your warning is deeply troubling. But surely you understand our hesitation. We know nothing of your people, or of these Vorians." Zarn inclined its head. "I understand, Counselor. But I implore you to consider the alternative. The Vorians will not negotiate. They will not show mercy. We Nebula have fought them for generations, and still they come." A young councilwoman, Naya, spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador?" "That we join your war." "An alliance," Zarn corrected. "A sharing of knowledge and resources. We have technology that could aid in your defense. In return, we ask only for a safe haven to repair our ships and treat our wounded." The debate raged for hours, the counselors divided. Some argued for caution, for neutrality. Others pointed out Zephyr's own history, how they had risen from the ashes of war to build a society of peace. Could they stand by while others suffered? In the end, it was Jaren who made the call. "We will hear more of what the Nebula have to say," he declared. "A small delegation will accompany Ambassador Zarn back to their ship, to assess the situation and report back. No decision on an alliance will be made until we have all the facts." The emissaries. As the chosen delegates boarded the Nebula ship, they couldn't help but marvel at the alien technology surrounding them. Sleek corridors lit by pulsing strips of light, control panels that responded to the lightest touch, the hum of powerful engines that whispered of interstellar voyages. Leading the group was Kai, a brilliant young xenobiologist who had been fascinated by the idea of extraterrestrial life since childhood. With him were Lena, the sharp-eyed air traffic controller, and Jace, a pilot with nerves of steel. Ambassador Zarn guided them to a large chamber dominated by a glowing holographic display. With a wave of its hand, the ambassador brought up an image of a monstrous ship, all jagged edges and bristling weapons. "A Vorian battlecruiser," Zarn explained. "Just one can lay waste to an entire planet. And there are hundreds more like it." The Zephyrs exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen anything like it. Their own ships were elegant, designed for exploration and diplomacy. The idea of facing such a behemoth in battle was unthinkable. But as Zarn continued the briefing, describing the nebula's desperate fight and the worlds that had already fallen, a new feeling began to stir in the hearts of the emissaries. It was a feeling that had guided their ancestors through the darkest of times, a feeling that had allowed a once warring species to find a better way. It was hope. And with it, a determination to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. The Harbinger. As the emissaries prepared to return to Zephyr with their report, an urgent message came through on the nebula's communication channels. A Vorian scout ship had been detected entering the system, no doubt a precursor to a larger invasion force. Ambassador Zarn turned to the Zephyrs, its luminous eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "It seems the decision may be taken out of our hands," it said softly. "The Vorians are coming. We must prepare for the worst." Kai, Lena, and Jace looked at each other, the weight of the moment settling on their shoulders. They had set out seeking knowledge, but now they found themselves on the brink of war. As their shuttle raced back to Zephyr, each was lost in their own thoughts. Kai pondered the wonders and terrors of a universe suddenly blown wide open. Lena's mind raced with strategies and contingencies, scenarios played out and discarded. And Jace gripped the controls tightly, knowing that soon, very soon, his skills would be tested as never before. Behind them, the nebula ship gleamed in the starlight, a beacon of hope in an uncertain cosmos. And on the horizon, a shadow loomed, dark and hungry, ready to consume all in its path. They were the first to know, the first to see. And now, they would have to be the first to act. For the fate of not just Zephyr, but perhaps the entire galaxy, rested in the balance. As the emissary's shuttle touched down on the landing pad, a crowd of anxious Zephyrs had already gathered. News of the Vorian scout ship had spread like wildfire, and the city was buzzing with tension and speculation. Kai, Lena, and Jace were quickly escorted to the Grand Assembly Hall, where the High Council awaited their report. The room was hushed as they entered, all eyes fixed on the three young Zephyrs who had ventured into the unknown. It was Kai who spoke first, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "Counselors, the situation is more dire than we could have imagined. The nebula are not exaggerating the Vorian threat. If anything, they may have understated it." He proceeded to describe what they had learned aboard the nebula ship, the scale of the Vorian fleet, the advanced weaponry, the relentless conquest of world after world. The counselors listened in growing dismay, the weight of the revelation etched on their faces. The history. As Kai concluded, Ambassador Zarn stepped forward. "If I may," it began, "there is more you should know. The story of our conflict with the Vorians is long and complex, but it is essential to understanding the threat we all face." The counselors leaned forward, rapt with attention as Zarn wove a tale of ancient alliances and betrayals, of a once peaceful federation shattered by the Vorians' insatiable hunger for power. "They were once our allies," Zarn explained, a note of sadness in its voice. "But something changed. Some say it was a shift in their leadership, others a discovery of a dark technology. Whatever the cause, they became bent on domination, on reshaping the galaxy in their image. The nebula had fought back, rallying other species to their cause. But the Vorians' technology had advanced at a terrifying pace, their ships and weapons always a step ahead. One by one, the allies fell, until only the nebula remained, a last bastion against the encroaching darkness." The debate. As Zarn's tale drew to a close, the assembly hall erupted into debate. Some counselors argued for isolation, for fortifying Zephyr's defenses and hoping the storm would pass them by. Others called for a preemptive strike, for meeting the Vorian threat head-on. But it was Naya, the young councilwoman, who cut through the clamor with a voice of reason. "We cannot hide from this," she said firmly. "Nor can we hope to fight it alone. The nebula offer us a chance, perhaps our only chance. We must seize it." She turned to face her fellow counselors, her eyes blazing with conviction. Our ancestors once faced a similar choice. They could have let fear and mistrust divide them, could have clung to the ways of war. But they chose a different path. They chose to unite, to build a society based on cooperation and compassion. And look what we have achieved. Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a rallying cry. Slowly, the tide of opinion began to turn. Yes, the risk was great. Yes, the unknown was terrifying. But the alternative, to sit back and watch as the darkness consumed them, was unthinkable. The accord. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Zephyr would stand with the nebula, would lend its strength to the fight against the Vorian menace. The details of the alliance were hammered out in a flurry of activity: technology exchanges, military coordination, humanitarian aid for nebula refugees. But even as the pact was sealed, a sense of unease lingered. The Vorians were coming, and Zephyr was now in their crosshairs. The price of standing up to tyranny would be high. Kai, Lena, and Jace found themselves at the center of the preparations, their expertise suddenly invaluable. Kai threw himself into studying nebula biology and technology, seeking any advantage in understanding their new allies. Lena worked tirelessly on fortifying Zephyr's planetary defenses, her keen mind mapping out strategies and contingencies. And Jace took to the skies, training a new generation of pilots to face the challenges ahead. The omen. As the days turned into weeks, the uneasy peace held. The Vorian scout ship had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and no further signs of enemy activity were detected. Some began to whisper that perhaps the threat had been overblown, that the nebula's tales of Vorian aggression were exaggerated. But Zarn knew better. This is but the calm before the storm, the ambassador warned. The Vorians are patient. They are likely gathering intelligence, assessing our defenses. When they strike, it will be with overwhelming force. The words sent a chill through the Zephyr leadership. They had committed to this path, but the reality of what they faced was starting to sink in. The Vorians were not just another adversary, they were an existential threat, a force that could erase their very way of life. In the Grand Assembly Hall, High Counselor Jaren stared out at the city he had sworn to protect, the silver spires glinting in the fading light. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, an enemy was preparing to strike. And Zephyr, for all its advancements and achievements, suddenly felt very small and very vulnerable. The calm. Yet even in the face of this looming shadow, life went on. The people of Zephyr, though anxious, refused to let fear consume them. They went about their daily routines, tended to their families and communities, pursued their dreams and ambitions. In a way, it was a testament to the resilience of the Zephyr spirit. They had built a society on the principles of unity and hope, and those principles would not be easily shaken. Kai, Lena, and Jace found themselves drawing strength from this resolve. They were the vanguard, the ones who would stand on the front lines of the coming conflict. But they knew they did not stand alone. Behind them was a civilization that had chosen to face the darkness head-on, to stand for something greater than themselves. And so they prepared, they trained, they planned. They forged bonds of friendship and purpose with their nebula allies. They pushed themselves to new limits, knowing that every ounce of knowledge and skill could make the difference between victory and annihilation. The stage was set, the pieces in motion. The Vorians were coming, and Zephyr would be ready to meet them. But the greatest battles, as Kai, Lena, and Jace were about to learn, are not always fought on the front lines. Sometimes, the most pivotal struggles take place in the heart, in the choices we make and the beliefs we hold dear. For in the end, it is not just the strength of our weapons or the might of our ships that define us. It is the courage of our convictions, the depth of our compassion, the endurance of our hope. The Zephyrs had that courage, that compassion, that hope. And they would need every bit of it for the trials ahead. In a dimly lit laboratory, nestled deep within the heart of Zephyr's capital, a group of scientists and engineers huddled around a glowing holographic display. At the center of the group stood Dr. Lena Patel, her eyes bright with excitement and determination. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is how we fight back." On the display, a series of schematics and simulations played out, towering mechanized figures, bristling with advanced weaponry and shielding, engaging in brutal combat with Vorian warships. The Guardian Project, as it had come to be known, was a radical proposal. Drawing on the combined knowledge and resources of Zephyr and Nebula scientists, it aimed to create a fleet of giant robotic warriors, piloted by the best and brightest of both species. The challenge. But turning this vision into reality would be no easy feat. The technical challenges were immense, integrating alien and human technology, creating control systems that could keep up with the lightning-fast reflexes of the machines, developing power sources that could sustain prolonged combat. And then there were the ethical concerns. Some on the Zephyr Council balked at the idea of creating such destructive machines, arguing that it went against everything their society stood for. Others pointed out the risks inherent in sharing their most advanced technology, even with an ally. But Lena and her team pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every day brought the Vorians closer. They worked around the clock, fueled by a potent mix of fear and hope, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion and beyond. The breakthrough. Weeks turned into months, and progress was slow. The first prototypes were clumsy, prone to malfunction and breakdown. Integrating the Nebula's advanced propulsion and weaponry proved more difficult than anticipated, the alien systems often incompatible with Zephyr's own technology. But then, a breakthrough. Jace, the ace pilot who had accompanied the first emissaries to the Nebula ship, suggested a radical new control system, a neural interface that would allow the pilot's mind to merge with the machine, becoming one with its sensors and systems. It was a risky proposition. The technology was untested, and the psychological strain of bonding with a mechanical titan was unknown. But Lena saw the potential immediately. If it worked, it could give the Guardians an unparalleled edge in battle. The bonding. The first test was with Jace himself. As he lay back in the interface chair, a web of electrodes and sensors enveloping his head, Lena could see the apprehension in his eyes. But there was determination there too, a willingness to put everything on the line for the cause. As the systems hummed to life and the neural link was established, Jace's body went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head. For a heart-stopping moment, Lena feared they had made a terrible mistake. But then, a miracle. On the display screen, the Guardian prototype stirred to life, its movements smooth and fluid, responding to Jace's every thought as if it were an extension of his own body. The Guardians. From that moment, the project leaped forward. More pilots were brought in, each carefully selected for their skills and mental fortitude. Kai and Lena were among the first to volunteer, eager to play their part in the coming fight. The bonding process was not without its challenges. Some pilots struggled to adapt to the mental strain, their minds reeling from the onslaught of sensory data and the sheer alien nature of the experience. But those who persevered found themselves transformed, their abilities enhanced to superhuman levels. As the first squad of Guardians took shape, a sense of hope began to grow among the Zephyr people. These towering machines, born of desperation and ingenuity, became symbols of resistance, of the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to submit to tyranny. The uncertainty. But even as the project neared completion, doubts lingered. The Vorians were still out there, their plans and capabilities shrouded in mystery. And there were some who questioned whether the Guardians, for all their power, would be enough to turn the tide. Lena felt these doubts keenly. She had poured her heart and soul into the project, had pushed herself and her team to the brink. But in the quiet moments, when the exhilaration of discovery faded, she couldn't help but wonder if it would all be in vain. The test. It was during one of these moments of introspection that the alarm sounded. A nebula settlement on the outskirts of the system was under attack, a Vorian raiding party striking without warning. As the pilots scrambled to their Guardians and the giant machines roared to life, Lena felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. This was it, the moment of truth. All their work, all their sacrifices, would be put to the ultimate test. As the Guardians blasted off into space, the fate of not just the nebula settlement, but perhaps the entire galaxy, hanging in the balance, Lena could only watch and pray. She had done all she could. Now, it was up to the pilots, those brave souls who had volunteered to stand on the front lines of this cosmic conflict. As news of the nebula settlement attack spread, the Zephyr command sprang into action. The Guardians were powerful, but they were only as good as the pilots who controlled them. And so, a call went out across the planet, a plea for the best and brightest to step forward and take on the mantle of defenders. The response was overwhelming. From every corner of Zephyr, volunteers poured in, seasoned veterans, eager recruits, those who had lost loved ones to the Vorian threat and those who simply believed in the cause. Among them were Kai, Lena, and Jace, already hailed as heroes for their roles in forging the alliance with the nebula. But they knew that the real test was yet to come, that piloting a Guardian in the heat of battle would push them to their limits and beyond. The Gauntlet. The training was unlike anything the recruits had ever experienced. The neural interface was just the beginning. They had to learn to move and think as one with their machines, to push their bodies and minds to the brink of human endurance. In the cockpit, they were subjected to grueling simulations, battling virtual Vorians in every conceivable scenario. They learned to weave and dodge through fields of laser fire, to coordinate their attacks with surgical precision, to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Outside the cockpit, they were drilled in tactics and strategy, in the art of war on a galactic scale. They studied the Vorians' tactics, pored over every scrap of intelligence the nebula could provide, looking for any weakness, any chink in the enemy's armor. The bond. But as the weeks of training wore on, something else began to happen. The pilots began to bond, not just with their machines, but with each other. They were a diverse bunch, different backgrounds, different species, different beliefs. But in the crucible of the Guardian program, these differences began to melt away. Kai found himself sharing stories with a grizzled nebula veteran, swapping tales of their respective worlds and the paths that had brought them to this moment. Lena spent long hours in the simulator with a young Zephyr recruit, pushing each other to new heights of skill and endurance. And Jace, ever the loner, began to open up to his fellow pilots, finding solace in their shared purpose and determination. Even the Nebula and Zephyr personnel, once wary of each other, began to forge connections. They worked side by side in the hangars and control rooms, learning from each other's expertise, finding common ground in their commitment to the cause. The calm. As the training neared its end, a sense of anticipation hung over the base. The Guardians were ready, the pilots honed to a razor's edge. All that remained was the wait, the tense, nerve-wracking calm before the storm. In these moments, the pilots turned to each other for strength and comfort. They sparred in the training rooms, traded jokes in the mess hall, sat in quiet contemplation in the base's gardens. They knew that the bonds they had forged would be tested in the fire of combat, that some of them might not return from the battles to come. But they also knew that they were not alone. They were part of something greater now, a fellowship of warriors united by a common cause. They drew courage from each other's presence, from the knowledge that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The call. It was Jace who first received word of the attack. He was in the cockpit of his Guardian, running through a final systems check, when the alert came through. A massive Vorian force had emerged from hyperspace, bearing down on the nebula settlement with terrifying speed. As the alarm klaxons blared and the base erupted into controlled chaos, Jace felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was it, the moment he had been training for. All the simulations, all the drills, had been leading to this. He looked out across the hangar, at the other Guardians stirring to life, their pilots rushing to their stations. He saw Kai and Lena, already suited up and heading for their machines, their faces set with grim determination. Over the comms, Commander Varen's voice crackled to life. All Guardian units, this is command. We have a code red situation. The nebula settlement is under heavy assault. Vorian forces include multiple battlecruisers and fighter squadrons. Your orders are to engage and destroy. Protect the settlement at all costs. As Jace's guardian lifted off, the hangar falling away beneath him, he felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of purpose. This was what he had been born for, what they had all been born for. Out in the black of space, the Vorian ships loomed like predators, their weapons already flashing as they tore into the settlement's defenses. But the Guardians were coming, a swarm of steel and fury, ready to meet the enemy head-on. It was time to put their training to the test, to see if the Guardians could live up to the hopes and dreams of those who had created them. It was time to stand, to fight, to show the Vorians the true meaning of human and nebula courage. The clash. Space lit up with the fury of 1,000 suns as the Guardians engaged the Vorian fleet. Lasers and plasma bolts crisscrossed the void, the silence of the cosmos shattered by the roar of engines and the scream of twisting metal. At the heart of the maelstrom, Jace and his fellow pilots danced a deadly ballet, their guardians weaving and spinning through the chaos with unnatural grace. They were outnumbered and outgunned, the Vorian ships dwarfing their mechanical titans. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in speed, in agility, in the sheer, unbridled determination of their human and nebula hearts. Kai found himself locked in a duel with a Vorian fighter, the two craft spiraling around each other in a dizzying display of aerial acrobatics. In the cockpit, his mind melded with the machine, Kai felt the strain on his guardian's hull, the searing heat of near misses. But he also felt the thrill of the fight, the fierce joy of testing himself against a worthy foe. Lena, meanwhile, had taken on a different role. Her guardian, equipped with advanced sensor arrays, hung back from the main battle, feeding tactical data to her comrades. She watched the ebb and flow of the fight, her keen mind analyzing patterns, seeking out weaknesses in the Vorian formation. When she saw an opening, she pounced, guiding her fellow pilots to strike with devastating precision. The discovery. But for all their skill and bravery, the tide of battle seemed to be turning against the Guardians. The Vorian ships were simply too many, their firepower too overwhelming. One by one, the giant mechs began to fall, torn apart by the relentless onslaught. In his cockpit, Jace gritted his teeth as warning lights flashed and alarms blared. His guardian was in bad shape, its armor pitted and scarred, its systems failing one by one. But he refused to give up, refused to let the Vorians win. And then, in a moment of desperate inspiration, he saw it. A flicker in the Vorian ship's shields, a momentary weakening that occurred every time they fired their main guns. It was a small thing, easily missed in the chaos of battle. But to Jace's trained eye, it was an opportunity, a chance to turn the tables. The gambit. All units, this is Jace, he called over the comms, his voice strained but steady. I found a weakness in their shields. When they fire, their defenses drop for a split second. We need to time our attacks to that moment. There was a pause, a heartbeat of uncertainty. Then Lena's voice, clear and confident, confirmed, Jace. I see it too. Feeding targeting data to all units now. Kai chimed in, his tone eager, let's do this. We'll hit them hard and fast, just like in the simulations. Across the battlefield, the Guardians began to move with renewed purpose. They dodged and weaved, drawing the Vorian fire, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, they struck with all the force of a thunderbolt. Jace led the charge, his Guardian's plasma cannon roaring as he dove towards the largest of the Vorian battlecruisers. For a split second, he thought he had misjudged, that the shields would hold. But then, with a blinding flash, his shot pierced the barrier, tearing into the ship's hull. The turning point. Across the battlefield, the other Guardians followed suit. Vorian ships began to break apart, torn asunder by the concentrated fire. The enemy formation dissolved into chaos, individual craft breaking off to flee or regroup. But the Guardians pressed their advantage. They swarmed the larger ships, picking off turrets and engines, whittling away at the Vorians' fighting strength. The tide had turned, the impossible had become possible. In his cockpit, Jace allowed himself a moment of elation. They had done it, against all odds. They had shown the Vorians that humanity and the nebula would not go quietly into the night. But even as the thought crossed his mind, a new alarm sounded. On his display, a massive shape emerged from the depths of space, dwarfing even the largest of the Vorian battlecruisers. What in the world is that? Kai's voice, usually so steady, held a note of fear. Lena's response was quiet, almost reverent. It's their command ship. The heart of their fleet. The behemoth. The Vorian command ship was a monstrous thing, a fortress of metal and malice that seemed to fill the very stars. Its weapons, now turning towards the Guardians, glowed with an eerie, pulsing light. For a moment, Jace felt despair clutch at his heart. How could they hope to stand against such a thing? How could they? But then, he remembered. He remembered the faces of his fellow pilots, the determination in their eyes. He remembered the nebula, the brave souls who had fought this war for so long, never giving up hope. He remembered Zephyr, his home, and all that he fought to protect. And he knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that they could not fail. That they would not fail. That as long as a single Guardian remained, as long as a single pilot drew breath, the fight would go on. Guardians, he called, his voice ringing across the comm channels. Form up on me. We're going in. The swarm. The Guardians gathered, a constellation of metallic warriors against the backdrop of the stars. Their armor was battered, their energy levels dwindling, but in their hearts, a fire still burned, the unquenchable flame of hope and defiance. They faced the Vorian command ship, a colossus of destruction, its weapons primed and ready. It seemed an impossible task, a fight beyond any reasonable chance of victory. But these were not reasonable times, and the pilots of the Guardians were not bound by the constraints of mere probability. They had seen the face of annihilation, had stared into the very maw of oblivion, and had not blinked. Jace's voice crackled over the comms, steady and sure. All right team, this is it. That ship is the key. We take it down, we end this here and now. For Zephyr, for the nebula, for every world that stands in the path of Vorian conquest. Let's show them what we're made of. With a roar of engines, the Guardians surged forward, a swarm of steel and courage, ready to meet their destiny. The sacrifice. The battle was joined, a cataclysm of light and fury that lit the very fabric of space. The Guardians danced and wove, striking at the command ship from every angle, seeking any weakness, any vulnerability. But the Vorian vessel was a juggernaut, its shields impenetrable, its weapons inexhaustible. It swatted the Guardians like flies, its every shot a death knell. One by one, the giant mechs fell, torn asunder by the relentless onslaught. Kai's Guardian, its legs blown away, drifted lifelessly, but not before he had taken a Vorian cruiser with him. Lena's machine, its core breached, erupted in a silent conflagration, a funeral pyre of metal and fire. And Jace, brave Jace, found himself alone, his Guardian crippled, his weapons spent. But even as despair clawed at his heart, a voice cut through the static, a voice he had never expected to hear again. Jace, this is Zarn. I'm coming in on your starboard side. The battered form of the Nebula Ambassador's ship, dwarfed by the titans that clashed around it, emerged from the void. Its hull was scarred, its engines flickering, but it moved with purpose, with determination. Zarn, what are you doing? Jace cried, his voice raw with emotion. Get out of here. It's too dangerous. But the nebula's response was calm, almost serene. It's the only way, Jace. We've analyzed their shield harmonics. There's a resonance frequency that can disrupt them, but it needs to be delivered at point-blank range. My ship has the emitter, but I need you to get me close. Jace understood then, with a clarity that pierced his very soul. This was the moment, the final stand. The last, desperate gambit in a war that had consumed galaxies. "All right, Zarn," he said, his voice steady once more. "Let's do this. For the Alliance, for the future." The leap. Together, the Guardian and the Nebula ship dove towards the command ship, a last, defiant charge against the very face of oblivion. Vorian fire rained around them, a maelstrom of destruction that seemed to shred the very fabric of space. But they did not falter, did not turn aside. With a synchronicity born of desperation and shared purpose, they wove through the storm, the Guardian shielding the smaller ship with its own battered form. Closer and closer they came, the command ship looming before them like a metal moon, its surface bristling with weaponry. Alarms screamed in Jace's cockpit, warning of imminent structural failure, of reactor overload. He ignored them all. His focus was absolute, his purpose singular. For in this moment, he was more than just a pilot, more than just a single cog in the grand machinery of war. He was hope. He was defiance. He was the unyielding spirit of all those who refused to bend knee to tyranny and oppression. And as he brought his Guardian in, the avatar of that spirit, he joined his voice with Zarn's, a cry of courage and resolution that echoed across the stars. For freedom. The resonance. At the last possible moment, Zarn's ship unleashed its payload, not a bomb or a missile, but a wave of pure, discordant energy that lanced out towards the command ship's shields. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The shields shimmered, absorbing the energy, seeming to shrug off the attack like all the others. But then, a ripple. A flicker. A momentary weakening, as the resonance found its mark, disrupting the very coherence of the shield matrix. It was enough. With a final, desperate surge of power, Jace drove his Guardian forward, tearing into the command ship's hull like a spear of righteous fury. Deep within the metallic behemoth, in a chamber pulsing with malevolent energies, the Vorian commander watched in disbelief as the Guardian breached his inner sanctum. Its armor was rent, its form battered beyond recognition, but still it came on, implacable, unstoppable. "Impossible," the commander whispered, his voice a sibilant hiss. No mere machine could. But his words were lost in the roar of the Guardian's reactor, overloading in a final, cataclysmic burst of power. A light, brighter than 1,000 suns, a fire to purge the darkness. And somewhere, at the heart of that light, a voice, a human voice, raised in one last, defiant cry. For Zephyr. For the Alliance. For the future. The Nova. The command ship exploded, a nova of fire and shrapnel that lit the void like a second star. The shockwave rippled out, shattering the Vorian fleet, sending their ships tumbling and careening like leaves in a hurricane. On the distant worlds of the Alliance, on the war-torn surface of the Nebula homeworld and in the gleaming cities of Zephyr, a cheer went up, a cry of joy and relief and sorrow all mingled. For they knew, with the certainty of those who have stared into the abyss, that the tide had turned, that the long night was finally, blessedly, drawing to a close. And in the hearts of all those who had fought and bled and sacrificed, a name was whispered, a name that would echo through the ages, a name that would forever be synonymous with courage, with sacrifice, with the indomitable spirit of life itself. Jace. The hero of Zephyr. The savior of the Alliance. The man who had given everything, so that others might live. Epilogue. In the years that followed, much would change. The shattered remnants of the Vorian Empire would be hunted down, their leaders brought to justice, their war machine dismantled piece by piece. The Alliance would grow and prosper, a beacon of hope and unity in a galaxy too long divided by war and strife. And on 1,000 worlds, statues would be raised, monuments erected to the memory of those who had fought and died in the Great Galactic War. But none would stand taller, none would shine brighter, than the towering figure that guarded the skies of Zephyr, a guardian, battered and scarred, but unbowed, unbroken. A testament to the courage of a pilot, the wisdom of a scientist, the faith of an ambassador. A reminder, to all who looked upon it, of the price of freedom, and the endless, indomitable spirit of those who would fight for it. For in the end, it was not the machines, not the weapons or the ships or the grand strategies, that had won the day. It was the heart, the soul, the unbreakable will of those who had piloted them. The heroes of the Guardian Corps. The saviors of the galaxy.